Well, a very warm welcome to everybody, and a big thank you to all the hard work that has gone on over the last 36 hours. I think for those of us who've been at a lot of forum meetings, you know, what was so distinctive about the discussions here was the level of expertise in the room, the extraordinary multidisciplinarity of what was going on in the rooms, the sort of lateral thinking that generated around proposals, and just the sheer creativity, the intelligence times ideas quotient that we had over the last 36 hours was, I think, extremely impressive, and, you know, many thanks to all of you. And I think we up here on this final panel feel the burden of that. What's left to say? But we're going to do our best to respond to some of the issues that have come up. So if I may just quickly, I mean, I think I'm not going to waste time on full introductions of this very distinguished group. I think President Halonen of Finland, who's to my immediate side here, then the Foreign Secretary of Mexico, Senora Espinosa Cantellano, Mrs. Sadako Ogata, who's known to so many of us, now of course President of JICA, Samantha Power, an old YGL, and now a very senior figure at the White House, and the one we all look to for championing our favorite multilateral ideas. Wim Kok, the long-serving Prime Minister of the Netherlands, and a hero to many of us, what he did during that period, and now President of the Club of Madrid, and Achim Steiner, the wonderfully dynamic head of UNEP. So a welcome to all of them. And let me jump straight in, and I can't do justice to all the discussions which have gone on over the last day and a half. But the way I'm going to do this is just quickly, for your sake as well as those on the panel, just capture a few ideas that have happened under each of these headings that we had, and get their reactions. And let me therefore, you know, start, if you like, with some of the discussions on the economy, where, you know, I think there was a huge agreement that getting back to strong growth was critical. It wasn't just a short-term issue. It absolutely underpins global development and capturing the benefits of globalization. But there was some very novel thinking on trade, and this is a good example of the lateral thinking. Our Global Agenda Group on this said we've got two negotiations which are stuck, trade and climate, so let's throw them both together and shake the box and come up with a sustainable free trade area where there would be free trade between countries that commit to a low carbon economy. There was also an agreement on agreed with the WTO that the GAC would also look at reviewing regional trade agreements where not all of them meet the same standards as what's going on in the global area. And, you know, a similar kind of inter-country issue which is so critical to growth, migration, a hot potato that people find so hard, or governments find so hard to get a grip on. There was a sense that, again, the work of the GACs to try and get people together to demonstrate best practice around showing skills gaps and how that can lead to an orderly pattern of migration between countries was a real area where things could be carried forward. Let me stop there on that first sort of cluster of ideas. And Madam Foreign Secretary, it may seem unfair to jump in but straight away on this, but it's, and we'll be coming back to you on climate change, but what do you think of a green trade zone, and also, if I may, your views on migration?
Well, I would say that it seems very appropriate to take the opportunity of this specific time and this specific scenario in which we're in, where we all agree we really must rebuild, redesign, really rethink the international structures, because evidently we are not getting the response to all the challenges that we are confronting. And this is the case of trade. Actually, the Doha round has been in a stalemate for a long time. And when we were, at least many of us, thinking that we had overcome the severe financial and economic crisis of last year, we are now again seeing signs of deep concern to many of us, and all the stock exchanges all around the world are being affected. So is the case of environment, where we are perceiving every day the effects of climate change. So I do believe it is a time where we can take this challenge as an opportunity to really look at innovation in terms of how we want to move forward. And when we speak about climate change, we are not talking about something that is theoretical in the air. We are actually talking about the sustainability of the system and the subsistence of the humankind. Production, well-being depends on a stable environment, and stable means not only in terms of economic terms, financial terms, but also in terms of availability of resources, of availability of sources of energy. So I really think we are here talking about the start of a completely new world, hopefully that can take into account all these different variables, and that can lead us to a state where we can, besides going on with development, really addressing the issues of taking care of the environment, of inequalities, of poverty, and we really believe we can do that if we can be creative enough and have the political will to compromise.
Great. If I may, Mr. Koch, can I just add one other item before getting your views on economy and growth? And that's finance. I'm not going to go into the details of all the discussion, but I think there was a strong sense that some of the sort of middle-of-the-road opinions that we'd managed to capture in this report, particularly in the rapporteur's chapter, which looked at what are the things that are kind of actionable and doable and possible in the relative short to medium term to improve financial regulation, to start addressing imbalances, to deal with many of the kind of issues which led to financial breakdown over the last 18 months. I mean, both, I imagine you'd align yourself behind moving that agenda forward, but perhaps I can, also throw in, a bit of a fastball on this, and also ask you, to what extent this new apparent crisis in the Eurozone is likely to accelerate work on financial reform.
Yeah, thank you. First of all, we should not forget that quite an important element of financial regulation still has to be implemented. Yeah. A lot of statements have been made and promises have been made, but the real implementation still has to follow. And I feel a general climate where the sense of urgency of that regulation on a worldwide level, and of course also in a regional level, is a bit disappearing, and that is discouraging. Having said that, we are facing problems in Europe nowadays. I don't want to over-dramatize the situation. I believe that Europeans still understand how important the creation of the European community was and how important it was to expand the European Union also into the former communist countries and now altogether with 27 member states. But the second stage of the financial crisis is in a way apparent. And there's a kind of paradox here, because on one hand you see the economy growing again. There is economic recovery all over Europe. And at the same time, especially countries with large debt positions are now under threat, partially caused by speculation, but also because of the fact that people really feel that countries with large debts are not prepared to bring their house in order at short notice. So I think some bold decisions will have to be taken at the central European level to restore the balance between monetary policy, which has been centralized, and economic policy, which is, of course, since the start of the Economic and Monetary Union, a decentralized responsibility for member states. And I always belong to those who said, let us maintain the independence of the European Central Bank, and I continue to be of that opinion. But having said that, a stronger coordination at the central level of economic policy monitoring and also budgetary discipline surveillance is absolutely necessary. And I think the markets are expecting and also waiting for that decision to be taken within relatively short.
Thank you. Well, President Halonen, you can't get much further in Europe from Greece than Finland. But I don't think land miles will necessarily be a defense if the euro contagion increases. So I'd love to hear your views on that. But can I add just two other issues that you may or may not want to comment on? There's been a lot of discussion here on both health and education, and the fact that you cannot have a global society if you still have such gaps in education, primary and tertiary, in the developing world, and where you still have such an uneven healthcare system globally. And, you know, there's some strong writing in the report about the need for a global healthcare system which addresses different categories of disease and addresses different categories of income in terms of, but which has a global approach and which brings in not just states but all the non-governmental partners who are so important in healthcare as well.
So thank you. Yeah, sometimes they say in EU family that we are two different type of the members of the family, because the Finns, we are very serious and we are always in time, sometimes too early in time. And with budgeting and with economics, we have been very serious. But we also know that what are the benefits to belong to the bigger fleet, because even Finland has made a lot good results in economics, and we have a good big enterprises and so on. We know that the population of 5 million is not enough in globalization, and that's why Euro has been a positive thing for us, even after all these things. And I think that our southern neighbors, Estonians, are thinking in the same way, because they are happy to join to Euro. Even we have had this Greek bushfire, as I call it, because I think that what happened in Greece was a little bit like a bushfire, that when it happened, everybody should be called to work together in order to stop it. But now when it's over, I hope so we can ask that who has not been careful enough with the fire. And it's not only the Greece. There are many others, and I would just remind, and excuse me all the French and German friends here, I remember a couple of years ago when we had a discussion concerning the regulations of the EMU. So it was a different kind of opinions how exactly should be all this. And that's why I would say concerning the euro, it's a very good example for the others also. To be honest, is very fine thing, but to be transparent help you to be honest. And in that way, this is the same concerning the international financial crisis. It was already years ago when we said that that's a weak point of the globalization, but before we got these difficulties, we were not, I mean, all international community ready to make those reforms we hoped. May I say to this green zone, I think that consumers want to have such kind of things because so-called fair trade has become very popular in different sectors like bananas, pineapples, roses, many other things now. So if they can choose, they want to do it with good conscience. Most of them, not all can do, but most of people. And so we could give an opportunity for them. And I think that this kind of the green trade zone is also one of these ideas to see that the free competition is perhaps good to give a good quality. But if it's only the free competition, it will be the power of the strong ones. And so we need the rules. And we need rules for the finance, we need the rules for the free trade, and so I would say that we need a fair globalization. And when you took this question of health and education, these are also one part of the fair competition. Not only free, but fair competition, because a majority of the people of the world have not the benefit to have an equal access to education. And from point of the Finnish economic, can I say still a certain kind of the success story is education, education, and education. So every single boy and girl should get a good education. The second request is that today all educations, even the best one, become old-fashioned in short and shorter time. What happened when we were young? I think both. Now, what we should do is to keep the joy of learning. Most of the kids have it, but somehow they lose it. And we should try to keep it so that they would be voluntarily eager to learn. And that's one point, and the other ones should find it again. But this is the more problematic thing, and I hope that you will find an answer for that. Health is another thing. It's not an easy access to the health services around the world. And I think that Madam Ogata and the others know very well that how difficult it has been to create for a majority of the world population this. And we should encourage also all nation states to use their responsibilities in order to create the dignity for the people also concerning the health. Thanks.
Thank you. Mrs. Ogata, can you, I know you will likely start with globalization, but if you could in your remarks, you sat through most of the development sessions, and it would be very interesting to hear what you thought were the important ideas that you, as an important development chief, will be taking away from that.
Well, there were several sessions on development, humanitarian assistance, economic assistance, development, importance of development work throughout the world. And also, there were the new challenges that come from rapid globalization. Is the existing systems adequate? Are the existing institutions really fulfilling the jobs? And this is when the various UN agencies, also the need, even the Security Council matters, these were questioned. And I think it is in this context that a lot of attention was given to health questions, because this is where the widest number of participants seem to be involved here at the meeting today. But personally, I think because of the globalization, that the dangers that are found in one part of the world affects the other part. And this is very, very clear in all the environmental issues and so on. But on security issues too, the existing security architecture is not sufficient in protecting the people. And this is where the human security issue came up in an implicit way. And as, I don't know if I'm responding to the questions raised, but as a first round, I think these were the impressions that the participants here were addressing big issues.
Yeah. Let me, just in a sense, building on that, I think what was very interesting on the security discussion was in many ways it was a development discussion, because there was this strong sense that the new security paradigm, and indeed the report asserts this, is less about the old hardware of national security between states, and much more about the internal software of state building, of tackling inequality and poverty, tackling weak institutions, and that you've got to manage that whole new agenda. And the sooner we reclassify development spending as security spending, maybe we'll start spending enough. And Samantha, I think that's an issue close to your heart. Let me also just say that particularly yesterday there was a huge discussion which underlay a lot of the discussion about international organization reform, of what one might call legitimacy versus efficiency. It's a familiar one to you, the universality of the United Nations versus the smaller, more effective coalitions, of which the most striking and provocative to some, reassuring to others, is the G20. And it would be very interesting to hear your views about where this debate on international institutional reform is. And from an American perspective, what you and your administration are looking for in terms of renewal of multilateral institutions.
Thanks, Mark. Let me first say, just in response to the last comment about the link between development and security, President Obama likes to quote Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and it turns out you don't get better than FDR even 60 or 70 years later, and even Obama, who's known for some quotes of his own, is very fond, again, of going back to Lincoln and Roosevelt. But Roosevelt talked about freedom from fear and freedom from want. And really everything we're talking about, including the financial crisis, is about how do we actually create a global environment where people actually live free from fear and free from want. I'm also reminded one of the individuals that many of us on this panel have in common, who's no longer with us, is Sergio Vieira de Mello. And he used to scream at the top of his lungs, as Madame Ogata did as well, I suspect, "I have lots of people on my team who know how to send a diplomatic cable. If I only had one who knew how to lay an electric cable, maybe, we'd actually have the technical expertise we need in post-conflict situations in order to actually engender that freedom from fear and want." In terms of the kind of legitimacy, representativeness, inclusivity, competence continuum, I think there's no question that institutions and frameworks that don't provide for people, even if they have all the representativeness in the world, are not going to be sustainable. That ultimately it's performance that gets judged over time, and it's performance that we have to ensure that our institutions and our frameworks give us, and that there's accountability around standards and performance, and indeed that there are feedback mechanisms where the people who are the alleged beneficiaries of our structures and our policies themselves have a say in assessments of performance. So I think that's the first point. Second, though, is that I'm sure we are moving in a direction. I think the G20 is probably the canary in the coal mine on this, where representativeness and efficiency and competence can converge, or indeed we have to move into that world. It's not tenable to have structures that are so anachronistic that they lose the support of global populaces, but nor is it tenable to move into a world where you've precisely captured the demographics and the economic cloud and so forth, but again, you have more stalemate, more quagmire, more polarization. So in a sense, debates over, I think, institutional migration of function really turn on governments, ultimately still the relevant operating building blocks in our world, and the vertical and horizontal pressures upon them to be responsible ancestors, ultimately, to be responsible caretakers. And I think one of the things that's really encouraging, or at least is a very hopeful sign as we think sort of 10 years, 15 years hence, is the fact that so many of the emerging powerhouses economically, so many of the G20 powers are democracies and have civil societies that right now, sure, are very focused internally, but that perhaps we can see, just as it took time in the United States and in other more developed countries, for civil society to focus on accountability on foreign policy and accountability on climate and actually have clout in that regard, that it's asking a lot to expect countries that are at an earlier stage of development to have that internal pressure in quite the same way. The only other thing I would add, Mark, is that now from the standpoint of being in a government and not just being an advocate on the outside, it's one of the things that we've, and this gets to the Prime Minister's remark a minute ago, crises drive change. Alas, the financial crisis drove the migration of function from the G8 to the G20. The AIDS crisis drove the creation of the Global Fund for TB, AIDS, and malaria. One of the questions I think we have to ask ourselves is not only what are the reforms that we're putting forward, what does modernization look like, but how can we have the moral and the political and the strategic imaginations to act prospectively, or, as the Prime Minister was suggesting, indeed, to sustain action even after the immediate crisis has passed. And I would just note that one thing that seems to drive governments, this is again a relative rookie in government, but is when governments gather and they have summits, there's this rush for deliverables, as many of you have experienced. Right now you see that in the run-up to the G8, you see it in the run-up, we'll see it in the run-up to the G20. I'm struck that the UN General Assembly is not itself seen as a forum for deliverables. And yet, if we're really talking about sustainable change, we've got to think about building a critical mass of countries that extend, to the least, from the least developed to the most developed, and really get global buy-in, back to your point about representativeness. So thinking through again, what is an action-forcing event that isn't a crisis that can create an appetite to make meaningful change?
Thanks. No, and I think we may try and, if we have time, come back to this point of how do we force change, because it was observed yesterday we got the G20 done in a matter of months after years of discussion about it, because there was a crisis and people felt the economy was about to go over the precipice. They needed a solution. Without that, things can be discussed without end. Now, one example of something we devoutly don't want a crisis for is climate change. But it suffers from just that, the prediction of a problem which will happen to our children and our children's children if we don't act now. And that is proving an enormously difficult thing to sell as a spur to action. But what was very striking in these meetings and in the GAC preparations for it was that there is a frustration with the governmental process, a respect for it, but a frustration at its slowness, and a feeling that where there are one or two governments willing to go ahead, then the private sector and civil society, such important constituencies in the forum, are lined up to join hands. And Achim, you sat through and participated in some of the discussions. It would be interesting both on your takeaway on what are the issues that we should try to attach to Cancun, if the Foreign Secretary will allow us, and but more broadly, are there non-climate change specific issues of environmental governance and the preparations for Rio in 2012, which you also heard some interesting things on over the last day?
Thank you, Mark. I certainly heard in today's discussions a slightly schizophrenic take on the world. On the one hand, a frustration with the institutional platforms, let's call it that for a moment, in our international system, be they G8, G20, United Nations, regional economic associations, to deliver the kinds of transformational change that is needed. And I think in some ways the whole global redesign initiative, the report the discussions we had today speaks to an increasing sense of urgency because developments are unfolding where neither institutions nor responses are capable of following or indeed leading. I would, in a sense, also perhaps in a slightly provocative way, juxtaposition this issue of legitimacy versus efficiency. It doesn't take a lot of efficiency to do something when you have $3.5 trillion that you pump into an economy and thereby, get some action happening. I think we have been waiting, if you want, for that kind of economic signal on some of the sustainability challenges that the world faces. And the difficulty is that the current economic reality still dictates that there is a lot of change required, transformational change, disruptive change. And you began earlier on by putting forward this idea of a green trade zone. It's a very interesting question. When Pascal Lamy and I set out to see if WTO and UNEP could jointly write a report that would look at the trade and climate change regime, it took us 2.5 years to just get the political space to do so. And I would say to your first question, the answer in one domain does not necessarily dictate a solution in the other. Yes, a green market could be a very interesting concept, but as you probably know, and many of you, the term of border adjustment tariffs is one that sends cold shivers down those who have worked for years to establish a global trading system, a free trading system. To developing countries, it could be a major threat. And this is not to disagree with Her Excellency the President of Finland. I think on the consumer level, it is already happening, but as a structuring of the world marketplace, much more controversial. The danger that we face if Copenhagen becomes a pattern is that we will end by default in having such a situation, and that presents a much greater threat than just the climate change negotiations. Final point, it's the interconnectedness that I think is also speaking through many of the sessions here. We are operating in a system where literally the ability to solve a problem is conditional upon having other parts of our global economy or political system act. And this is where the various fora we have, be they G20, United Nations and others, are struggling at the moment because essentially we are in a world that is struggling to act in cohesion because of, in terms of climate change, a great inequity. You cannot expect one group of people to jump this high when another group of people is not willing to jump this high. So is it the process, because that is another echo that we heard a lot here, is it the institutions and the process that is at fault, or is the world essentially at a point where it is lacking the capacity to act collectively? Climate change is a no-brainer. President Calderon, President Lee of Korea, Premier Wen Jiabao of China, President Obama of the United States were all presidents that used, or prime ministers, used the financial crisis to direct a significant share of their stimulus package towards a green transition in energy and transport. China and Korea being in fact the biggest ones in absolute and relative terms, and also recovering most quickly. So I agree with Samantha. I think we need to look for positive opportunities for significant change and not revert to the old economy, because you began at the beginning with the statement we're returning to a growth pattern. Is it growth in the old economy, or is it growth in tomorrow's, or as I would refer to it, the green economy? And I think that is perhaps where the redesign initiative is now struggling to find the institutional connectivity to allow that to happen.
Well, thank you. I'm going to quickly come back because there's so much more to cover, and I know there will be voices from the floor, and we'll try and make time for that. But there are just a few other issues I'd like to raise as we perhaps come back, Prime Minister, starting with you and coming this way. The first is, the point was made that without a good crisis, it's hard to get change. Well, I think many of us here think there is an alternative way to get change, which is a new global values system. That if the values of interdependence and community can be just better seeded and lead to institutions and the global rule of law, then maybe this is another route to create the leverage for change. Is it just the spur of crisis, or is the softer way of a values revolution also a way to build a better global governance?
Well, I cannot deny that sometimes countries or people need a crisis in order to really really becoming aware of the necessity for change. Having said that, and I react to your question, to part of your question, I spoke about the paradox earlier when I talked about Europe. The second paradox is that in times where the interdependence has never been so overwhelming as today, people are inclined, hopefully not in other countries, but at least I see it in my region of the world, people are inclined to become somewhat more inward-looking even than in the past. And that leads to perhaps some kind of pessimism. There's only one important spark of optimism. We talked about Copenhagen could have been better. I think that one of the lessons of Copenhagen is that these kind of processes should be organized in a different way from how it was organized over there. I'm not blaming anybody, but I mean, as an observer, that's my conclusion. Second conclusion is that in spite of the fact that the governments perhaps were not yet ready enough to come to far-reaching agreements, I see in the civil society world and also amongst individual citizens and communities and at the local level, for example, a total change of atmosphere. The number of green cities all over the world is growing and growing, and they're inspiring each other, and they also inspire governments who have perhaps not been bold enough to make significant steps forward. And you see that also in other areas. So my point is that there's perhaps a lot to complain about the way in which governments behaved, are not able enough to get things changed. But at the same time, a lot of private initiative in the field of development, in the field of education, private-public partnerships, development cooperation is really done now in a different way. There's a different way of thinking about how to improve the quality of development. And you see it also in environmental issues. So I think, and that's also one of the attractive aspects of the event today and yesterday, and the preparation that has been made in the last during the last months and years, and documents that have been produced. There's a lot of enthusiasm amongst people who are not belonging to a government, but really can make a difference.
Great.
And that gives hope.
Thank you, thank you. Samantha, I mean, it won't surprise you that throughout pretty much every recommendation about international organization reform that has come up, what Rick Sammons likes to call the multi-dimensional part of it is there, which is the role of civil society, the role of business, that new international organizations or renewed ones cannot just be interstate organizations. That just doesn't do justice to the complexity and range of actors on the international scene. So you've touched on it a bit, but I'd love to hear a bit more of your views on that as a, the member of an administration of what for now remains the world's #1 government in terms of state power. But the second issue, if you would, I'd love you to comment on is there was a feeling that international organizations are always designed for yesterday's problem, and that the difficulty is not just that they therefore aren't fit for purpose for tomorrow's problem, but they can't even recognize it when it's coming. And you could say the same of government. And therefore, a huge bit of work done in this report is on risk. And, how pretty much every risk gets identified, but there's no way of scaling it, getting it to the right decision makers in the proper way. And if the forum sees a major continuing role going forward, it is to take the work of our GACs, which has been at the center of this report, and of our other constituencies, and organize what we're calling a global agenda partnership, which is an ability to try and track, identify risk, get our experts to think about responses, but above all, to use our network of communities to make sure that business knows what government's worried about and government knows what business is worried about, and both know what civil society is worried about, because, you know, that kind of early warning system seems to have gotten lost in a world where globalization is intensifying both the numbers of and kinds of crises we have, but also their global velocity. You know, a public health problem isn't one country anymore. It's 190 plus countries before you're through if it's an infectious disease. So your thoughts on both the new kind of international organization, the post-state one, if you like, or state plus one, and also this issue of risk in government?
Yeah, it's very, very challenging. And I happen to think a lot about risk because my husband is in the Obama administration in charge of regulation. And so every day he's weighing a regulation that comes in, a proposed regulation from the Environmental Protection Agency, and what the impact that will be on the financial crisis and on our economy. So on the one hand, weighing the risk of toxicity or something like that. On the other, the risk of a straw that breaks a camel's back in a particular community or business. I think it's very, very challenging. The other dimension I would add to your question about risk, to which I don't have a great answer, you talked about the proliferation of entities and actors and the complexity, but it's also the proliferation of information. I mean, Robert Schiller is on record as having warned of this housing bubble, and may well win a Nobel Prize for his prophecy. But in a sense, so many governmental, business, and other actors, we all need to go back, citizens as well, and do the kind of after action as to why Robert Schiller's predictions only become salient after the housing bubble has burst. And this is maybe a role for the forum, is the distillation among the proliferation of ideas. You'd love to live in a world where the universal wiki, the marketplace of ideas, the assessments of risks, that there was a meritocracy such that that information, the right predictions, the right balancing found its way into decision makers' hands. I think everything we know about the market indicates that where human beings are involved, foibles and human fallacy is also involved. So I think actually what we know about economic markets shows us even how much more challenging all assessments of risks are in all spheres. And how, while it's great to have crowdsourcing and incredible amounts of information, pooled knowledge and so forth, just again, how that is likely also to aggregate human habits. To your first question about non-traditional actors in international organizations, I think we're so not there yet in terms of really understanding how to integrate either the expertise or the resources of non-traditional actors. Every meeting one talks about, in government that is, we talk about public-private partnerships, but I think we're all striving to move away from still then going back to what we always do, what we've done for decades, and then kind of presenting it to the private sector and saying, what do you think? Or presenting it to the NGOs and saying, hey, good idea, isn't it? And so really integrating, non-traditional actors into not only solution presentation, but solution acquisition. It really requires bringing new kinds of people into governments, I think, who've got experience in those sectors. It requires, structural changes like promoting people who have actually sought out those kinds of partnerships in government. We'll make dents here and there, and I think we're learning as we go. President Obama is a huge believer in doing this. We just had the Entrepreneurship Summit in Washington, which was a tremendous example of how government can be a platform for something tremendously beneficial as it happens to this part of the world. But all he did was, show up and give opening remarks, and just the convening power brought a lot of entrepreneurs together with American businesses and so forth, and then of course businessmen were off to the races. And that probably did as much good as any particular policy, you know, in the financial or economic realm in that given week. I would give, you know, any discussion about the state always involves a reckoning on the one hand with its perceived diminishing relevance, and then on the other hand, a nostalgia and a desire for strong state structures, and especially in light of the kinds of challenges we're talking about, the need for states to really assert themselves. We spoke earlier, in an earlier session, about mass atrocity and about responsibility to protect. Here's a case where I think, at least in the United States, we've been lucky to see a real partnership or a kind of synergy between bottom-up civil society leadership, governmental responsiveness, but even the success, which I'll describe very briefly, itself underscores the limits of this approach if we don't get other actors involved. So the upshot is, in the United States, post-Rwanda, as you know better than anybody, there's been a pretty profound birth of an anti-genocide movement, anti-atrocity movement. I think a lot of it in the early part of this century was displaced anxiety about the Iraq war that young people had, that they kind of channeled into Darfur, and there became this, again, members of Congress, faith groups, students, etc. President Obama has just, about 2 months ago, created the first ever White House Director for Atrocity Prevention and Civilian Protection, recognizing that whatever the movement, whatever the public support for, you know, trying to do prevention when it comes to atrocity, that gravity will always take the system, the governmental system, in a different direction, and that ultimately contingency planning won't be done, levers won't be inventoried, et cetera. So he's created this position by virtue of this bottom-up pressure. And yet, of course, in this much more dispersed world of power, what is essential is that non-traditional actors outside of governments, individuals and change agents in other governments, particularly in emerging powers, that there is some kind of coalition much beyond, you know, again, a single government, a single commitment, a single aspiration. And so you need, I think, structures, people, reflexes, and connectivity in order to see real change, and we're only at the beginning of that.
Okay, thanks. We're going to have to pick up the pace now just because we are getting very tight on time, but Mrs. Ogata, just at the end there, we were getting close to your territory of R2P and the whole issue of how we prevent atrocities. Are we making progress? Did we make progress here on that?
We're talking about progress, but whenever there are atrocities, we say, how awful. But we have not been able to prevent that. And I think it's because the models that we're taking are too much international models. Atrocities and so on come from history, social structures and so on within our own societies. And how much can we really learn from our own societies? I think models of governance will have to come about really learning for people within societies, but with different backgrounds, different wealth, and so on, to live together. And I'm very glad to hear that the Obama administration really looking at people. I am very much happy that we're talking about people's strength and so on. But to structure that into a system is a very difficult thing. And I don't see, in the UN, we have talked about it, we have talked about human security and so on, but is that structured into the UN decision making? I doubt that. And so these are the differences between what we know we have to do. Maybe we have to look for different models. But I think the World Economic Forum has tried bringing in young people, bringing different kinds of people to work together. And I think this is what, I'm glad you mentioned Sergio, because he cared for people. And I think those of us who work will have to be working closely with the people. The big challenge, I think, is that things change so rapidly. And this is the result of information technology, but also money moving, people moving. It's not the stable, quiet, traditional lives that most people can take advantage and think through and act. So we have to, everybody has to be in a rush. Yeah. And how can you do decent work in a rush? And this is the question. I have no answer. But these are things that in development work too. We have to go down and live and be with the people, not just do charity work.
Thank you. Secretary Espinosa, I want to give you a chance to say a little bit more on COP16 and what lies ahead on climate change, but let me just tell you one other extraordinary thing that happened here. Oceans, the great deep water sleeping environmental issue, really to see the ability of this group in this room to come together, scientists, civil society activists, government people, and say, we've forgotten oceans. And, you know, in its way, it's as much a threat to our global future as climate change is. And we need to get governance in place. We need to press those who are, you know, stealing fish stocks. We need to press the polluters for a whole new deal on oceans. And, you know, maybe if COP16, when you're finished with that, we can give you oceans as a new assignment.
Thank you. Well, actually, I think that one of the elements that I take with me from the discussions, and I regret that I could not participate in more of the discussions because it certainly is very, very interesting and educating to get the inputs from so different perspectives and actors. One of the ideas that I take with me is that when we speak about climate change, we have to make more evident the intimate relationship and what it is really about. And this is the first, I'm going back to the first remark I made. It's really taking care of the environment, and the environment is really about all different agendas within the environment. It may mean water for some, it may mean ocean level for others, it may mean forestry for others. It's when we are speaking and negotiating about climate change, we talk about mitigation and adaptation and financing and technology, and somehow maybe this dimension gets lost, and it's really about different aspects of environment. And for that reason, it is so difficult to put together a single package that can address the reality, the situation, the interests, and the possibilities of so many actors in so many different levels and in so many sectors. I think this is something that somehow we will need to pick up again in Cancun and in the process towards Cancun, that we make more clearly evident what it really is about. And also, I fully agree with the importance of when we talk about a global challenge needs a global response. It means not only global in terms of all the countries in the world. It means global in terms of civil society, business, unions. It means really all the actors. It's the two dimensions of what global can be interpreted.
Great, thank you. Madam President, I can see you've been scribbling, and
yes.
I know you've got views on pretty much everything that was said. If I may, I'm just going to allow you to do that. Try and keep them brief because we're into overtime now. But just one word I wanted to say to you, and that is the word metrics. You're in government, it probably won't surprise you that across pretty much everything, from oceans to risks of different kinds to health, everybody's been complaining about data. And the need, why is it in an information age where, as someone observed here, by next year, more people in the world will have access to the internet than to electricity? Why is it with all this technology, we're not able to provide better real-time data for decision makers to help make our arguments as advocates? So this issue of metrics has really loomed large, and I think is something that all of us feel we've got to tackle as a world community. So if you have a view on that, it'd be great to hear it, and then you've got that last word on anything else that you particularly strongly want to react to.
He has seen how I look. But if you have to accept it, I'm the former activist of NGOs, but now I have been already 10 years a president, and before that 5 years Minister for Foreign Affairs, and something else which you would think that it's part of the state structure. But anyway, so I think coming from this issue of the climate change, so and also this data, so I think that we have advanced. I remember, sorry if I speak directly to the USA side, so welcome back. It's fine that you are now on board, because I remember the time when we were arguing whether there is a climate change or not. Now we are arguing at what are the next steps. So this is a progress, and I'm hopeful Cancun or South Africa, but anyway, we are going further. And I hope that we can react in time. We cannot know that, whether we are already late, but we have to try to be in time. And so in that way, data is important. And it's not either states and governments or NGOs and business community. Already in Global Compact, we agreed, and we have, since that we have acted, since Johannesburg, we have acted together. It's both and. And we have to accept that we have all these demands at the same time in agenda, plus something what we even don't know today, what will be tomorrow. And this is, of course, the work of the politicians too. But I think that it's not only for the NGOs to say that they know what, it's also the question of how. Because we are not the kids who say that, Mommy, I want this, and you have to decide how we get it. But we have also to think all the time, and that's why the forums are important, how. And I think that we have to do it at the same time between the states, because nation states, strong democratic nation states with an open mind for the international cooperation are still the basic blocks. But at the same time, let's be also the activists in NGO side, even the presidents, and then also the business community. And what I think that I tell to you, even you didn't ask it, because when we are thinking the Cancun, and you mentioned the oceans, so after the Copenhagen, I was a bit disappointed, if I say it nicely. But then I thought that, yeah, perhaps the expectations were so high when we finally were in Copenhagen, and perhaps the NGOs thought that what happened in Bali could be repeated in Copenhagen. But Copenhagen is not Bali. And so after that we were all disappointed, but good enough, we in the north, we had already called together so-called Baltic Sea Action Summit. And what's that? Why I want to tell it also to you to use, is that Finland, we made a proposal, but then we invited Sweden, Denmark, Germany, Norway, Poland, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and Russia to work together, because our nice Baltic Sea is not clean, it's dirty. And that's why we thought that something should be done. But we had already HELCOM, and we had different systems and a lot of international agreements, but not enough implementation. And then we took the idea of the Clinton's initiative, that you have to promise something. And then both the heads of states and governments, business communities and NGOs and private people, they came and said what they are ready to do. We thought that it's good if we get some tens of them. We got a little more than 150 commitments. And what we are doing now is that the states are observing this afterwards. The NGOs are observing this afterwards. And we will see what will happen if they don't implement it. And that could be used here. That could be used in Mediterranean. That could be used in whatever you like. And so, I mean, we have to act not only to wait for Cancun, we have to act now. Also, everybody, everywhere, we have a lot of ideas. And you said on the internet, yes, let's use the internet, but let's use also the personal contacts, because this is a power. And don't forget women. Women are, as you see here, a good power to work with. That's all. Thank you.
Let me observe, that is a very good point to finish on, because this is, finally, we've made it. We've got a panel here with a majority of women on it, and that is a fine sight to see. Let me, and I just want to say that, I used politically, I was worried it was going to be thought a politically incorrect metaphor in the opening session, which was, imagine this meeting as lots of very clever policy ideas, pretty brides in search of bridegrooms, the bridegrooms being governments who would marry these ideas and take them back into national policy. Now, you may think that's sexist, but not really, because I love ideas and I'm not so keen on government. So I think my analogy is just about okay. But the point is, I think we've been a very successful marriage broker after the last day and a half. I think we've seen how the South Korean Sherpa process for the G20 has been enriched, I hope, by a lot of these discussions around development, finance, and environment. We have in the Mexico process now, I hope similarly we've been able to dock into that very strongly. We've been able to dock into the UN financing panel by clever lucky appointment of one of our own to that panel. I think we've seen that on issues like health, the relevant UN agency, in that case WHO, their interest in the recommendations in that area, in trade, similarly a strong partnership with WTO. We've seen ideas which we haven't even been able to bring up this evening, such as an energy forum, really taking off, the idea of putting producers and consumers together to talk about issues of energy security and, pray God, one day of energy prices, as someone who pays for the stuff at the pump in Europe. So I think there's been a hugely important discussion, and that we're going to see a lot of ideas go out of here and get into the policy process. And it'll be our job as the forum, as the platform for this, not the advocate, but the platform, to help encourage that process. And for many of you who've been the authors of them through the GACs, to work on keeping them going, making sure we finish the last hurdles of the race and get these ideas into G20, UN, national government processes of different kinds. So with that, if I may, I'm going to ask the founder and executive chairman of the forum, Klaus Schwab, to come and close the meeting for us.
Thank you, Mark. And I would like first to thank the panel again. It's unbelievable how all the discussions, I think, which we had over the last 36 hours were some way reflected in the panel discussion. And particularly what is important, you have seen, so there is a great echo to all the ideas which have been collected, which came up. And I can promise you, on behalf of the World Economic Forum, that certainly we will make everything to make sure that there is a follow-up to the work done here. We will, as Mark already, Lord Malloch-Brown already mentioned, we will catalyze the work and the global redesign initiative into an ongoing global agenda partnership to monitor what has been worked out here, what the success of all those proposals is in terms of the implementation. But there will certainly be new surprises on the global horizon, which we will integrate into what we are doing. I think what is unique here is that what was so often mentioned in the discussions, that we have a holistic approach, and not only a holistic approach, but a multi-stakeholder approach, so that everybody is engaged. Global cooperation and global governance is the business of all of us. It's not just the business of governments, and we all have a responsibility, which I think you were role models in taking this responsibility so seriously by working hard in the preparation of the meeting, but also by coming here and working so intensively over the last 36 hours. So I would like to thank everybody having been engaged, and I would like to express special thanks to my colleagues, Lord Malloch-Brown, Rick Sammons, who have shepherded us so well through all those discussions, to my colleague Andre Schneider and Lee Howell, who have contributed so much to the development of the program, and to everybody, my thanks go, who helped to make your presence here not only productive, but hopefully also enjoyable. I took out, Mrs. President, Madam President, I think you encouraged us, or me, in looking forward, for example, to the next annual meeting in Davos, and we had already lengthy discussions on what the theme should be, and you captured it in 3 letters. Maybe the theme for the next annual meeting in Davos should be how. How do we take everything which has been proposed, and how can we really implement it? Now, last but not least, I would like to thank our hosts. This meeting has been made possible thanks to the gracious hospitality of the state of Qatar, and I would like to express our gratitude to His Highness Sheikh Hamad bin Khalifa Al Thani, the Emir of the State of Qatar, His Excellency Sheikh Hamad bin Jaber Al Thani, the Prime Minister and Minister of Foreign Affairs of the State of Qatar. But I would like to express also our gratitude to all the many organizations and people who, on the side of our Qatari friends, have been involved in this endeavor. And here I would like to thank again particularly Mohammed Abdullah Al-Rumalhi, the Assistant Foreign Minister. And finally, this this meeting is already a great demonstration of public-private partnership, because this meeting has as its patrons 4 governments which have been very intensively engaged, and I would like to thank the 4 patron governments, of course, the state of Qatar, Switzerland, Singapore, and Tanzania. Now I wish you all a good return, and let's again come back to my promise. We will work, but we all have to work together. We all have to be ambassadors. I would say we have to be ambassadors of the Global Redesign Initiative. We have to be ambassadors of what has been achieved here in Qatar, thanks to your thinking, thanks to your engagement. Thank you.
To the staff at the pump in Europe. So I think there's been a hugely important discussion, and that we're going to see a lot of ideas go out of here and get into the policy process. And it'll be our job as the forum, as the platform for this, not the advocate, but the platform, to help encourage that process. And for many of you who've been the authors of them through the GACs, to work on keeping them going, making sure we finish the last hurdles of the race and get these ideas into G20, UN, national government processes of different kinds. So with that, if I may, I'm going to ask the founder and executive chairman of the forum, Klaus Schwab, to come and close the meeting for us.
Thank you, Mark. And I would like first to thank the panel again. It's unbelievable how all the discussions, I think, which we had over the last 36 hours were some way reflected in the panel discussion. And particularly what is important, you have seen, so there is a great echo to all the ideas which have been collected, which came up. And I can promise you, on behalf of the World Economic Forum, that certainly we will make everything to make sure that there is a follow-up to the work done here. We will, as Mark already, Lord Malloch-Brown already mentioned, we will catalyze the work and the global redesign initiative into an ongoing global agenda partnership to monitor what has been worked out here, what the success of all those proposals is in terms of the implementation. But there will certainly be new surprises on the global horizon, which we will integrate into what we are doing. I think what is unique here is that what was so often mentioned in the discussions, that we have a holistic approach, and not only a holistic approach, but a multi-stakeholder approach, so that everybody is engaged. Global cooperation and global governance is the business of all of us. It's not just the business of governments. And we all have a responsibility, which I think you were role models in taking this responsibility so seriously by working hard in the preparation of the meeting, but also by coming here and working so intensively over the last 36 hours. So I would like to thank everybody having been engaged, and I would like to express special thanks to my colleagues, Lord Malloch-Brown, Rick Sammons, who have shepherded us so well through all those discussions, to my colleague Andre Schneider and Lee Howell, who have contributed so much to the development of the program, and to everybody, my thanks go, who helped to make your presence here not only productive, but hopefully also enjoyable. I took out Mrs. President, Madam President, I think you encouraged us, or me, in looking forward, for example, to the next annual meeting in Davos, and we had already lengthy discussions on what the theme should be, and you captured it in 3 letters. Maybe the theme for the next annual meeting in Davos should be how. How do we take everything which has been proposed, and how can we really implement it? Now, last but not least, I would like to thank our hosts. This meeting has been made possible thanks to the gracious hospitality of the state of Qatar, and I would like to express our gratitude to His Highness Sheikh Hamad bin Khalifa Al Thani, the Emir of the State of Qatar, His Excellency Sheikh Hamad bin Jaber Al Thani, the Prime Minister and Minister of Foreign Affairs of the State of Qatar. But I would like to express also our gratitude to all the many organizations and people who on the side of our Qatari friends have been involved in this endeavor. And here I would like to thank again particularly Mohammed Abdullah Al-Rumalhi, the Assistant Foreign Minister. And finally, this this meeting is already a great demonstration of public-private partnership, because this meeting is, has as its patrons four governments which have been very intensively engaged, and I would like to thank the four patron governments, of course, the state of Qatar, Switzerland, Singapore, and Tanzania. Now I wish you all a good return, and let's again come back to my promise. We will work, but we all have to work together. We all have to be ambassadors. I would say we have to be ambassadors of the Global Redesign Initiative. We have to be ambassadors of what has been achieved here in Qatar, thanks to your thinking, thanks to your engagement. Thank you.